On March 6, 1944, American P-51 Mustangs escorted bombers to Berlin for the first time in history under enemy skies. This mission marked a decisive turning point in the air war, demonstrating the revolutionary range and endurance of the Mustang fighter. Led by Colonel Donald Blakeslee, the 4th Fighter Group embarked from RAF Debden with absolute confidence and unshakable determination. German intelligence believed Allied fighters could never reach their capital, trusting distance as a shield against continuous air escort. The P-51B, equipped with external drop tanks and an internal fuselage tank, extended its combat range far beyond expectations. This technological advancement allowed escorts to remain with bombers throughout their mission, preventing disastrous attrition previously suffered over enemy territory. For the first time, American bombers crossed into central Germany without losing the protective shadow of accompanying fighters. The psychological blow to Luftwaffe commanders was immediate, as they realized their airspace was no longer impenetrable by enemy aircraft. Luftwaffe pilots scrambled to intercept the intruders, only to find themselves outmaneuvered by nimble Mustangs performing daring tactical dives and climbs. The sight of silver P-51s slicing through the skies above Berlin sent shockwaves through German defenses and civilian observers alike. Bomber crews, once accustomed to fatal isolation, now saw friendly fighters weaving protectively in deadly aerial patterns. This development marked the end of unchecked German dominance in the upper atmosphere surrounding their capital, shifting the balance decisively. In the skies over Berlin, the Mustangs engaged enemy interceptors with brutal efficiency, inflicting devastating losses unseen on earlier missions. Veteran German pilots, already exhausted from relentless combat, now faced an enemy capable of meeting them at any altitude. The attrition suffered by the Luftwaffe that day crippled its ability to respond effectively in future large-scale engagements. As aircraft fell and pilots perished, the myth of invulnerability surrounding the German heartland began to crumble dramatically. American pilots returned to England exhausted, their muscles cramped from 6 hours in the cockpit, yet triumphant beyond measure. They knew the mission had altered strategic air power forever, proving Berlin could be reached and bombed repeatedly with fighter protection. Post-war testimony revealed Hermann Göring's despair upon learning that the dreaded Mustangs had finally breached the skies over his capital. From that day onward, the Luftwaffe faced a relentless foe capable of pursuing its aircraft from coast to capital without pause. The long-range Mustang ensured that no part of Nazi Germany would remain unreachable, ushering in true Allied air supremacy. The P-51 Mustang did not begin as a legend, but as a response to an urgent British request in 1940. Originally designed for the Royal Air Force, the Mustang incorporated a laminar flow wing and sleek airframe for exceptional speed. Its performance at low altitude impressed, but its potential truly emerged once paired with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. Suddenly, the Mustang transformed from a capable escort into an extraordinary high-altitude interceptor with remarkable fuel efficiency for its power. This combination laid the foundation for what would become the finest long-range fighter of the Second World War. American engineers recognized that defeating the Luftwaffe demanded a fighter capable of escorting bombers far beyond previous limits. Early escort fighters like the P-47 Thunderbolt and P-38 Lightning lacked the essential fuel capacity for deep penetration missions. The breakthrough came when North American Aviation installed an 85-gallon fuselage tank behind the Mustang's cockpit. Coupled with new 108-gallon drop tanks beneath the wings, it radically extended the aircraft's operational reach. This innovation, though mechanically simple, revolutionized air strategy by placing German targets within continuous fighter range. The engineering challenges of extending range were not solely about fuel, but also maintaining agility and firepower under heavy load. Designers carefully balanced weight distribution, ensuring the aircraft remained responsive despite increased fuel and ammunition capacity. The Mustang retained 4 50-caliber machine guns in its wings, delivering lethal fire in tight, twisting dogfights. Despite the risks of fuel sloshing near the pilot, its self-sealing tanks provided crucial protection under enemy fire. Within months, what began as an experiment had become the backbone of Allied air strategy over Europe. From the factories in California, Thousands of Mustangs rolled off assembly lines destined for sky-ranging duels across the continent. Ground crews marveled at its durability, and pilots praised the harmonious blend of power, stability, and range in combat. It became more than a tool of destruction, symbolizing American innovation and the determination to reach distant battlefronts unhindered. This aircraft bridged the gap between tactical dogfighting and strategic bombing support, offering flexibility unseen in earlier designs. By mid-1944, the Mustang was universally acknowledged as the indispensable escort fighter of the Allied air campaign. The P-51's emergence was not just a victory of engineering, but a testament to foresight in modern aerial warfare. Its development marked the beginning of air power untethered by geography, projecting lethal force anywhere it was needed. Without it, the strategic bombing offensive would have faltered, undermined by catastrophic losses deep in enemy territory. Instead, the Mustang secured the skies and accelerated the destruction of Nazi Germany's industrial and military infrastructure. A new era of air supremacy had begun, forged by precision engineering and an unyielding will to dominate the heavens. Colonel Donald Blakeslee embodied the fierce, daring spirit of the 4th Fighter Group during the critical months of 1944. A veteran of the Eagle squadrons, he carried with him unmatched knowledge of aerial combat and relentless tactical energy. Blakeslee believed deeply in aggression, often saying the best defense for bombers was a furious offensive against enemy fighters. This mindset would shape how the Mustang was employed over enemy territory, with missions designed to seek and destroy. His leadership transformed the 4th Fighter Group into the most feared unit of the 8th Air Force's Fighter Command. Blakeslee demanded his men push themselves and their aircraft to the limits, believing complacency meant death in the air. He drove them to train in severe conditions, perfecting gunnery, formation flying, and energy tactics at extreme altitudes. When ordered to test the Mustang's range into Berlin, Blakeslee accepted without hesitation, despite warnings of high risk. For him, the mission symbolized a necessary gamble, a chance to finally turn the Luftwaffe's strength against itself. His confidence inspired younger pilots who followed him into the most hostile skies in Europe without hesitation or fear. The 4th Fighter Group's pilots were a mix of American veterans and former RAF volunteers with rich combat experience. Their reputation for boldness was matched only by their precision, delivering devastating firepower in carefully coordinated strikes. They understood that escort duty was not passive, but an active effort to break enemy squadrons before they could attack. Blakeslee's strategy emphasized splitting formations, diving on targets of opportunity, and exploiting the Mustang's superior climb rate. It was a calculated high-risk style, but one that kept German pilots constantly reacting instead of controlling engagements. Blakeslee insisted on aggressive use of drop tanks, pushing his fighters deep behind German lines despite fuel doubts. His mantra was clear: if the Luftwaffe wanted to fight, the Mustangs would meet them on their own doorstep. The mission to Berlin symbolized this doctrine, risking everything to shatter enemy morale and deny them sanctuary. When the squadron returned home after the mission, they had destroyed multiple interceptors and protected the bombers decisively. Blakeslee's gamble paid off, proving long-range escort fighters could utterly dismantle German air defenses across Europe. His leadership left a lasting legacy, not just in victories, but in shaping the mindset of American tactical aviation. He taught that air superiority was not granted, but seized through courage, precision, and relentless pursuit of the enemy. For the 4th Fighter Group, under Blakeslee, every mission carried a message that no target was beyond reach or reprisal. His daring gamble on March 6 changed the course of air combat, setting a standard for offensive fighter strategy. In the end, Blakeslee proved that leadership in the skies required both fearless action and unbreakable trust in one's aircraft. The approach to Berlin on March 6, 1944, marked a defining moment in the air war over Europe. For the first time in the conflict, American single-engine fighters crossed into the airspace of Hitler's capital. The P-51 Mustang swept in behind the bomber stream, glinting in the high-altitude sunlight above the sprawling city below. German radar stations reported with alarm that enemy fighters were approaching, a development long considered impossible by command. Citizens in Berlin, already accustomed to air raid sirens, now saw fighter silhouettes unknown to their skies before that day. As the Mustangs soared closer, Berlin's flak batteries opened fire in frantic volleys, desperate to disrupt the incoming raid. The Luftwaffe scrambled every available interceptor, but their formations were immediately pounced upon by the escorting fighters. Mustangs dove from towering altitudes, tearing through defensive screens with bursts of heavy machine gun fire and lethal precision. The battle unfolded not only in defensive arcs around the city, but in its vast surrounding airspace in chilling aerial duels. This was not a probing mission, but a clear declaration that no part of Germany was beyond American reach anymore. The bombers unleashed their payloads targeting critical industrial infrastructure, while the Mustangs ran interference with ruthless tenacity. German pilots, many drained from months of continuous fighting, struggled to regain initiative against the relentless escort fighters. Even elite units like JG-11 and JG-26, once feared for their skill, suffered heavy losses during this first encounter. The surprise of finding American fighters overhead stunned the Luftwaffe, which had underestimated the Mustang's endurance and tenacity. Mustang pilots exploited their aircraft's speed and climb rate, transforming open German skies into a battlefield of sudden death. From the ground, Berliners watched dogfights unfold above rooftops, both horrified and awed by the spectacle of air combat. The capital, once believed secure under layers of air defenses, now echoed with the roar of foreign engines. This visual and auditory intrusion shook civilian confidence, confirming rumors that Allied fighters were nearing their homeland centers. The psychological blow was incalculable, stirring doubt even among high-ranking commanders certain of the Reich's air dominance previously. With their first appearance, Mustangs struck at more than aircraft. They shattered illusions of Nazi invulnerability within German borders. The return flight to England saw exhausted pilots nursing fuel reserves, but their mission had already succeeded beyond expectation. They had not only survived the raid, but controlled the air over Berlin, crippling enemy defenses in a single stroke. Their arrival marked the beginning of a new chapter in aerial warfare, one where range no longer shielded the Reich. The Luftwaffe's myth of territorial safety was gone, replaced by the harsh reality of Allied air supremacy taking form. Berlin was no longer a distant prize. It was a battlefield now raided with impunity by the long-range Mustang's wings. The Luftwaffe's bitter awakening began on March 6, 1944, when P-51 Mustangs appeared over Berlin, shattering their final illusions of safety. German commanders who once believed in natural geographic barriers now faced an enemy capable of reaching their airfields and factories directly. The Luftwaffe's interceptors scrambled in desperation, unaware that this mission was only the beginning of a sustained, long-range assault. Even experienced units like JG-26 Schlagete and JG-3 Udet were caught by surprise, suffering catastrophic losses in the initial dogfights. The Luftwaffe had underestimated both the Mustang's range and the escort strategy that now dominated Allied air operations over Europe. Pilots of the once dominant German air arm faced opponents equipped with high-altitude power and overwhelming fire discipline. The P-51s maneuvered into attack positions with lethal efficiency, often diving on enemy fighters struggling for altitude advantage. What once were carefully choreographed defensive tactics devolved into chaotic dogfights where German pilots found themselves constantly reacting. Their dwindling fuel and limited climb performance left them vulnerable to attacks from above and behind, where Mustangs excelled mercilessly. Each interception attempt turned into a deadly trap, costing the Luftwaffe not just aircraft, but irreplaceable veteran pilots. Losses mounted exponentially as the Mustangs pursued damaged German fighters back to their bases, strafing them during landings. This tactic demoralized seasoned pilots and shattered the confidence of recruits who entered combat with slim odds of survival. Germany's fighter forces, once hailed as elite protectors of the Reich, now struggled under the constant hammer of escort fighters. The Allied shift from defensive escort to offensive sweeps over German airspace marked the collapse of Luftwaffe tactical resilience. In mere months, The balance of air power tilted irreversibly, with every Luftwaffe defeat echoing across the collapsing front. Fuel shortages crippled not just aircraft, but the very training pipeline that fed future generations of German pilots. With industrial plants in ruins and oil fields bombed relentlessly, new aircraft arrived without fuel, leaving many grounded indefinitely. Young cadets were thrown into combat with minimal flight time, facing Mustang veterans with hundreds of hours of lethal experience. The Luftwaffe's strategic radar network, once sophisticated, now issued warnings that arrived too late to counter surprise attacks. The German High Command realized too late that the enemy had achieved not just range, but total strategic tempo. The Mustang's presence over German territory signaled more than destruction. It announced the final unraveling of Luftwaffe air superiority. Traditional defensive objectives crumbled under the weight of Allied range, discipline, and tactical innovation at every level of engagement. By spring of 1944, even Hermann Göring admitted the Luftwaffe's defeat was sealed the day Mustangs reached the skies over Berlin. What began as disbelief ended in strategic ruin, as Germany's once feared air force dissolved under relentless offensive pressure. The Luftwaffe had awakened to the realization that it no longer commanded the sky, it merely occupied the space beneath Allied wings. The P-51 Mustang's role evolved rapidly from protective escort into aggressive hunter deep inside German airspace, utterly unstoppable. Commanders authorized sweep operations, encouraging pilots to seek enemies beyond bomber formations with decisive tactics and ruthless aggression. Pilots learned to manage fuel, guns, and timing, turning defensive screens into offensive hunting formations over hostile territory. They embraced initiative, attacking Luftwaffe fighters piecemeal before they organized into coordinated interception groups with deadly effect immediately. This new doctrine transformed every sortie into a pursuit, hunting damaged aircraft back to airfields and strafing targets. Mustang pilots perfected the art of containment, boxing enemy wings until vulnerability emerged and fatal strikes were delivered. Radio discipline and visual signals enabled coordinated attacks, ensuring multiple fighters converged on selected adversaries simultaneously and decisively. The Mustang's speed allowed hit-and-run tactics, closing swiftly for brief volleys, then climbing away to avoid sustained engagements. Pilots used altitude advantage, baiting enemy fighters into climbing fights where Mustang performance at height proved overwhelmingly decisive. Once enemy formations fractured, Mustangs exploited openings ruthlessly, creating cascading failures across German defensive networks and air operations. In an engagement near Brunswick, a small flight of Mustangs ambushed returning interceptors, inflicting severe losses before withdrawal. Their victories were not isolated incidents, but part of a growing pattern eroding Luftwaffe numerical and experiential advantages. Ground attacks against airfields increased, forcing German fighters to operate from damaged bases with limited maintenance and supplies. This attrition eroded veteran cadres, leaving inexperienced youngsters to face seasoned Mustang pilots and learn through brutal consequence. Tactics that once protected bombers now hunted the hunter, reversing initiative and seizing operational momentum for the Allies. Logistical strains intensified as fuel and spare parts became targets, degrading Luftwaffe sortie rates and repair cycles significantly. Commanders scrambled to adapt tactics, dispersing squadrons, altering engagement windows, and prioritizing homeland defense over offensive sorties urgently. Yet strategic paralysis propagated as industries faltered under continuous bombardment while pilot losses outpaced accelerated training programs dramatically. Allied intelligence exploited weaknesses, directing raids against fuel depots, assembly plants, and radar sites with ruthless precision consistently. These coordinated efforts converted aerial superiority into systemic collapse, undermining the Luftwaffe's ability to sustain coherent defensive operations. The psychological impact was profound, eroding Luftwaffe morale as frontline pilots questioned command decisions and survival prospects. Propaganda offices scrambled to explain losses, attempting to downplay incursions while civilians murmured fear and uncertainty in streets. Allied air crews noted a boldness, exploiting tactical collapses to press attacks deeper, denying Germans any safe haven. By late spring, air superiority translated into strategic freedom, enabling raids with diminishing enemy resistance and Allied momentum. The Mustang evolved into an instrument of pursuit, its pilots enforcing doctrine that fused escort duty with offense. On 1944, RAF Bodney Airfield, England. In the frozen mist of a wartime morning, the roar of Merlin engines was not the first sound to break the quiet, but rather the clatter of tools, the rasp of breath, and the murmur of ground crews already knee-deep in their struggle against time. For every Mustang that sliced through European skies, there lay an unbroken chain of hands, minds, and muscle below, men who fought a war just as critical as the pilots they served. These were the armorers, wrench-turners, wire-checkers, and fuel-line masters, the unsung mechanics who worked 12-hour shifts in mud, snow, and night fog to keep the P-51s in the air. While the Mustang was lauded for its long-range capabilities, blistering speed, and unmatched dogfighting agility, none of it mattered if a magneto misfired or a coolant hose burst at altitude. Every sortie, from high-altitude escorts over Berlin to strafing runs in the Ardennes, was a gamble placed on their precision. The Mustang's Rolls-Royce Merlin engine was a technological marvel, a liquid-cooled V-12 capable of propelling the aircraft past 430 miles per hour. Yet its complexity demanded ceaseless vigilance. Ground crews learned its rhythms, its quirks, and its limits. A piston ring out of alignment meant catastrophic failure. A fouled spark plug could ground a fighter minutes before takeoff. They worked under blackout conditions, often in deafening silence, driven by the truth that every minute lost on the ground risked lives in the air. Maintenance wasn't simply labor, it was improvisation. Replacement parts ran scarce as missions intensified. Mechanics scavenged from wrecks, modified fuel pumps, fabricated makeshift tools. They wielded humor like armor, enduring frostbite and exhaustion while racing against ticking mission boards. The Mustangs they serviced were more than machines. They were lifelines for bomber crews, escorts for shattered formations, and sometimes salvation for lost men stumbling toward airstrips on one sputtering engine. And yet, they never flew. Rarely did they receive medals or glory. Their wars were fought in oil-stained coveralls, beneath plane bellies lit by torchlight, with the urgency of men who knew one mistake could echo across Europe in falling wings and broken radios. When the P-51s returned from battle, wings punctured and engines screaming, it was the mechanics who met them, not with cheers, but with action, ready once more to wage their tireless, unseen war. By the summer of 1944, the Allies held undisputed command of the European skies, a triumph sealed by the relentless dominance of the P-51 Mustang. The Luftwaffe, once the symbol of Nazi invincibility, was now a broken force, crippled by attrition, fuel shortages, and the loss of its most experienced pilots. The Mustangs had done more than escort bombers. They had dismantled an entire air defense network piece by piece, until Goering's air arm could no longer rise in strength or confidence. When Operation Overlord began on June 6, 1944, that mastery of the skies was absolute. Over the beaches of Normandy, waves of American, British, and Canadian bombers flew unchallenged, blanketing German positions while transport planes dropped paratroopers behind enemy lines. Above them, the P-51s orbited tirelessly, sweeping the clouds clear of opposition. Not a single German formation reached the invasion fleet in force, and for the first time in the war, air superiority was not contested. It was guaranteed. In Berlin, Hermann Goering received reports with disbelief. His once proud Luftwaffe, which had terrorized Europe in 1940, was now reduced to scattered squadrons, unable to intercept or sustain prolonged combat. Many aircraft never even left their runways, grounded by the Allied destruction of fuel depots and synthetic oil facilities. The Mustang's long-range reach had made geography meaningless, ensuring that every airfield within Germany was vulnerable, every sortie suicidal before it even began. For the ground troops storming Normandy's beaches, this invisible shield in the sky was salvation. Allied soldiers advanced without fear of air attack, while German divisions struggled beneath constant strafing from roving Mustangs. The Luftwaffe's last defenders, inexperienced boys flying aging BF-109s and FW-190s faced veteran American pilots who hunted them mercilessly. Within weeks, Allied commanders confirmed what intelligence had predicted. Göring's Air Force was effectively annihilated as a fighting entity. The destruction of the Luftwaffe transformed the nature of warfare in Europe. The skies that once belonged to the Reich now served as Allied highways of destruction, carrying bombs, supplies, and freedom deeper into the continent each day. The Mustang had become the blade that cleared the air for D-Day's success, and its pilots, the silent architects of victory. From that summer onward, the war's outcome was no longer uncertain. The Allies owned the daylight, and with it, the power to bring Nazi Germany to its knees. The legacy of the P-51 Mustang was forged not only in steel and engine roar, but in the blood and resolve of those who flew and maintained her. As the war drew to a brutal close, the Mustang stood symbolically at the convergence of aviation ingenuity and wartime necessity. Its triumph was a testament to the power of collaboration, with American industry, British insight, and pilot courage combining to reshape air superiority. By war's end, its influence had changed more than tactics. It had altered the fate of nations and the imagination of generations. Even after Germany's surrender, the magnitude of the Luftwaffe's collapse reverberated across the world. Where once Göring had boasted of skies ruled by eagles, now lay the remnants of a defeated air arm, crippled beyond recovery by relentless Allied air power. And at the heart of that victory had been the Mustang, its range and lethality making flight over Berlin as routine as over Kent. The fall of the Luftwaffe was not merely military, it was psychological, marking the end of the myth of Nazi aerospace invincibility and demonstrating the supremacy of long-range fighter doctrine. For the pilots, the Mustang had been more than a machine. It was a lifeline, a weapon, and in many cases, a coffin with wings. Thousands never returned from the skies they sought to conquer, their sacrifices woven into the enduring story of air combat. For every triumphant escort mission survived, another was haunted by the memory of a wingman lost in German flak or the sudden flash of a cannon shell tearing into aluminum skin. Their deaths served a purpose greater than victory. They secured a world finally free from fascist tyranny. The Mustang's innovations did not fade with the war's end. Its design influenced the next generation of fighters, ushering aviation toward the jet age. Engineers continued learning from its aerodynamic brilliance, even as piston engines were eclipsed by turbines. In museums and memorial flights, the Mustang still soared, its Rolls-Royce Merlin growl echoing across airfields in peacetime, reminding new eras of the terror and triumph of global conflict. In the final accounting, the P-51 Mustang's legacy was not just one of engineering perfection or combat dominance. It was a story of unity, courage, and sacrifice, a reminder that ingenuity and determination could defeat even the darkest forces. And as it passed into history, the Mustang carried with it the memory of every life it defended, every foe it bested, and every freedom it helped protect.